The painting lies. It shows Napoleon Bonaparte striding forward with the French flag in his hand, his coat lifted by the wind, his face turned toward victory. Behind him is the bridge at Arcole. In the legend, one fearless gesture carries an army across it, but that is not what happened. On November 15, 1796, French soldiers were trapped on a narrow causeway in the marshes east of the Adige River. Austrian cannon fired straight down the road. Musket balls struck the head of the column. Men at the rear could not even see the bridge they were being ordered to take. Napoleon raised a standard and moved forward. The soldiers did not sweep across behind him. The attack collapsed. In the confusion, Napoleon was forced off the causeway and into a muddy ditch. His men had to pull him out while Austrian troops counterattacked. The bridge remained in Austrian hands. Arcole would not be won by a single heroic charge. It would take 3 days of failed assaults, night withdrawals, improvised crossings, and calculated deception. And when the battle was over, Napoleon would turn that dangerous failure into one of the most powerful images of his life. This is the real story of Arcole, the battle that Napoleon nearly lost, and the legend he made from it. 3 months earlier, victory at Castiglione had defeated Austria's first great attempt to relieve Mantua. But the fortress itself had not fallen. In September, Field Marshal Wurmser came south again. Napoleon pursued him through the mountains, winning at Roverito and Bassano. But Wurmser escaped into Mantua with part of his army. He had reached the fortress, but he had not saved it. The additional troops increased the garrison while consuming the same shrinking supply of food. Disease spread through the crowded defenses. Horses were slaughtered. Every extra soldier inside Mantua made the fortress stronger in battle and weaker over time. The French restored the blockade. Vienna prepared a third relief attempt. Command passed to Field Marshal Joseph Alvinci. His army would approach from the east through the Friuli and the Brenta Valley. A second force under General Paul Davidovich would descend from the Tyrol through the Adige Valley. If the two wings united near Verona, they could crush Napoleon and open the road to Mantua. On a map, the plan threatened the French from 2 directions. On the ground, it also separated the Austrian armies by mountains, rivers, and days of marching. Napoleon had exploited this weakness before. But in November, his own army was close to breaking. The Army of Italy had been campaigning for 7 months. Its divisions had crossed the same roads again and again. Uniforms were torn, shoes were worn through. Hunger, sickness, and desertion were rising. The names Montenotte, Lodi, and Castiglione filled triumphant bulletins, but past victories could not replace sleep. The Austrian offensive began in late October. Davidovich drove the French back in the north. Alvinci advanced from the east. Napoleon moved against Alvinci near Bassano on November 6, but he failed to stop him. 6 days later, the French attacked again at Caldiero, just east of Verona. Cold rain and sleet swept across the battlefield. Massena attacked near Colognola, while Augereau struck around Caldiero. The French advanced uphill against strong positions, and the wet weather made movement and musket fire difficult. The Austrians held. Napoleon withdrew into Verona. It was a clear defeat, and the strategic picture was now close to disaster. Alvinci stood near Verona. Davidovich remained dangerous to the north. Wurmser and the garrison of Mantua waited for an opportunity to break out. Napoleon could not be sure which threat would move first. Another frontal attack at Caldiero offered little hope, so he stopped looking at the Austrian front and searched for the road behind it. South of Verona, the Adige curved through low country. Near Ronco, engineers could bridge the river. Beyond it, raised roads crossed a landscape of marshes, drainage channels, and flooded fields. One road led north toward Porcile. Another led east toward the village of Arcole and across the Alpone stream. Beyond Arcole lay Villanova and the Austrian line of communication. If the French crossed secretly at Ronco, they could appear behind Alvinci's left flank. He would have to turn away from Verona or risk losing the roads that supplied his army. Operationally, the idea was brilliant. Tactically, the terrain was a trap. The marshes prevented soldiers from spreading into battle lines. Infantry, cavalry, cannon, ammunition wagons, and wounded men would all be forced onto a few narrow causeways. A small force with 2 guns could stop an entire division if it controlled the road ahead. Napoleon accepted the risk. On the night of November 14, the French quietly left Verona and marched south along the western bank of the Adige. Before dawn, engineers built a bridge of boats at Ronco. Augereau crossed first, followed by Massena. From the bridgehead, their routes divided. Massena moved along the northern causeway toward Porciel, protecting the left flank and threatening the approaches to Caldiero. Augereau turned east toward Arcole, intending to cross the Alpone and reach the road to Villanova. At first, surprise worked. The Austrians had not expected Napoleon's army to emerge from the marshes behind their flank. Then the landscape began to fight for them. Massena met Austrian troops along the northern road. The battle moved back and forth over strips of raised earth surrounded by waterlogged ground. Augereau's division approached Arcole. The final road ran straight toward a small bridge over the Alpone. Austrian infantry defended the village, the embankment, and the far bank. Their cannon could fire directly along the narrow approach. The causeway became a funnel. French soldiers at the front dropped under musket fire and grape shot. Those behind pressed forward without room to deploy. Some men tried to shelter below the edge of the road. Officers pushed toward the front, attempting to restore movement. Augereau reportedly seized a standard and tried to lead his men on. The attack failed. More Austrian troops arrived. The bridge became harder, not easier, to take. Napoleon now tried to create the moral shock that tactics had not produced. He took a flag and advanced toward the bridge, with grenadiers around him. This was real courage. It was also a desperate response to a plan that had stalled. The gesture did not open the road. Fire and confusion broke the movement. Austrian troops counterattacked. The French recoiled, and Napoleon ended up in the marsh beside the causeway. For several dangerous moments, the commander of the Army of Italy was separated from safety before his soldiers dragged him out. The bridge was still Austrian. Elsewhere, enemy attacks threatened the French bridgehead. Napoleon's army had the Adige behind it and a temporary bridge as its principal route of retreat. If the Austrians reached Ronco, the marsh maneuver could end in catastrophe. Massena counterattacked and helped restore the position, but the first day ended without the decisive result Napoleon wanted. The French had not secured Arcole. They had not cut the road at Villanova. Alvinci's army remained intact. That night, Napoleon pulled much of his force back toward the western bank of the Adige. It looked like retreat. But the bridge at Ronco remained, and before the Austrians could understand his intention, the French returned. On November 16, the same struggle began again. Massena fought along the northern causeway. Augereau moved once more toward Arcole. Austrian columns attacked down the narrow roads, but the terrain that restricted the French also prevented Alvinci from using all his strength at the same time. The battle broke into isolated contests for embankments, junctions, and patches of firm ground. Units advanced, stopped, withdrew, and attacked again. Smoke hung over the wet fields. Reinforcements moving forward met wounded men being carried back. Ammunition carts competed for the same road as infantry columns. A disabled gun or broken wagon could obstruct hundreds of soldiers behind it. There was no clean front line, only a network of causeways whose possession changed hour by hour. This was the hidden labor of Arcole. Orders that looked simple on a headquarters map became physical problems in mud and darkness. Officers reorganized mixed groups of soldiers. Gunners shifted weapons by hand. Battalions attacked before every company was ready, because waiting might give the Austrians time to reinforce the next junction. Napoleon also began using the confusion of the landscape as a weapon. Small detachments created movement beyond the visible fighting. Noise and scattered fire suggested threats whose true size the Austrians could not judge through the reeds and smoke. Still, the second day produced no clean breakthrough. The French again contracted toward Ronco after dark. 2 days had passed. Alvinci understood that the French position threatened his communications, but his road had not yet been cut. Napoleon understood that another direct assault on the famous bridge might only add bodies to the causeway. For the third day, he changed the geometry of the battle. During the night, French engineers prepared another crossing over the Alpone farther south, near its mouth. This would allow Augereau's troops to move around Arcole instead of approaching only along the bridge road. On November 17, Massena renewed pressure from the north. Augereau maneuvered south of the village and crossed the Alpone at the new point. French pressure now came from more than one direction. The bridge at Arcole was no longer the only door. As the Austrian position became unstable, Napoleon sent a tiny mounted detachment around the flank. A few dozen guides, accompanied by trumpeters, created the impression that a larger French force was arriving behind the Austrian line. In open country, the trick might have been exposed immediately. In the marshes, where commanders could hear troops they could not see, uncertainty magnified the threat. French attacks converged. The defenders began to withdraw. Massena's men crossed through Arcole as Augereau's force pressed from the south. Fighting continued beyond the village, but the road system had shifted in Napoleon's favor. Alvinci ordered a retreat. After 3 days, the French held the field. Arcole was a victory, but not the victory shown in the painting. Napoleon's original plan had nearly failed because he underestimated the defensive power of the marshes and causeways. His soldiers had not followed a flag across the bridge in one irresistible charge. The position was won through repeated pressure, a new crossing, local counterattacks, and a final deception that increased Austrian fear for their communications. The battle demonstrated persistence more than perfection. Napoleon returned each day because the alternative was worse. If he abandoned Ronco permanently, Alvinci could resume his advance and possibly unite with Davidovich. By keeping the French army in the marshes, Napoleon forced the Austrian commander to look backward instead of toward Mantua. The achievement also belonged to soldiers who had every reason to stop. Many had fought at Caldiero only days before. They had marched from Verona at night, crossed a temporary bridge, and spent 3 days fighting over the same exposed roads. Food, ammunition, and the wounded all passed through a narrow bridgehead. The army survived because thousands of exhausted men continued to carry out small, difficult tasks that no heroic painting would ever show. Even then, the third relief attempt was not destroyed in a single stroke. Alvinci withdrew, and Davidovich failed to combine with him at the decisive moment. Napoleon had gained time and restored the separation between Austria's forces. Mantua remained blockaded. Inside the fortress, food and health continued to deteriorate. Wurmser had more soldiers than he could feed. Outside, the French army was also approaching its limit. Arcole had not ended the campaign. It had bought time. But Napoleon understood that battles were fought twice, once on the ground and again in memory. Antoine Jean Gros painted the young general with the standard, turning toward his men as if victory waited just beyond the frame. There was no failed attack, no ditch, and no soldier pulling him from the mud. 3 days of uncertainty were compressed into one perfect instant of courage. The image was not invented from nothing. Napoleon had exposed himself to genuine danger. His presence mattered to an exhausted army. But the painting transformed courage into inevitability. That transformation became another weapon in Napoleon's campaigns. He did not only maneuver divisions, he maneuvered memory. Austria would make one final attempt to save Mantua. In January 1797, Alvinci would return from the north with a new army divided into several columns. Their roads would converge on a high plateau above the Adige. At Rivoli, there would be no marsh to hide the battlefield. There would be steep heights, a narrow gorge, and Austrian formations that could see one another without being able to support one another. Napoleon would not have 3 days. He would have 1 night to identify the main threat, 1 morning to hold the plateau, and 1 battle to decide the fate of Mantua. If you want to see how a tired French army turned that mountain trap against a larger enemy, follow the strategic past. The next battle will decide the campaign.